The wind howled through the tall pine trees of Elmswood as the mourners stood in solemn silence. Black umbrellas dotted the graveyard like bruises beneath the gray sky, each held by trembling hands. Rain tapped lightly on polished caskets, whispering secrets only the dead could hear. In the center of it all, Sarah Campbell stood numb, gripping a damp letter from the police in one hand and a folded flag in the other. Her brother, Michael, had been declared dead 2 weeks earlier. His car was found crushed against a tree at the base of Weller's Bluff, the kind of accident no one walks away from. The body had been burned beyond recognition, but the belongings in the car, his wallet, dog tags, and phone, left no doubt in the authorities' minds. They had buried an empty shell that day, and Sarah buried a piece of herself with it. She remembered the last message he sent her. "Don't believe what they tell you. I've seen what's behind the trees." At the time, she had dismissed it as another of Michael's mental breakdowns. He had been obsessed with the forest ever since their parents died in a hiking accident there 5 years ago. His grief had turned into paranoia, and eventually, madness, or so everyone thought. The preacher spoke, but Sarah didn't hear a word. Her gaze was locked on the forest that bordered the cemetery. It was the same forest that had taken her parents, and now, her brother. The crowd dispersed. Her aunt tried to hug her, but Sarah shook it off gently, mumbling that she needed time alone. As everyone drove away, she remained by the grave. The rain had stopped, but the clouds hung low, casting the woods in a shade of bruised silver. And that's when she saw it. A silhouette, tall, still, watching, just beyond the trees. She froze. Her heart pounded, adrenaline kicking in. The figure was unmistakable, the tilt of the head, the way it held its arms. It looked just like Michael. "Michael!" she whispered, stepping forward. But the shape vanished, melting into the trees like a breath in cold air. That night, she couldn't sleep. The house was too quiet, too cold. She kept replaying that moment in her head. What if it had been a hallucination? What if the trauma was finally taking its toll? At 2:16 a.m., her phone buzzed. "Unknown number. I told you I'd come back. Don't trust anyone." Her blood ran cold. She stared at the screen in disbelief. No one else knew what that message meant. No one but Michael. Outside, the wind picked up again, and something scratched at her window. The scratching at the window came again, soft at first, then more deliberate. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She moved silently from her bed, stepping carefully across the wooden floorboards of her childhood bedroom. Moonlight leaked through the curtains, casting pale stripes across the wall. She pulled the curtain aside. Nothing, just the breeze stirring the branches of the oak tree outside. But something felt wrong. Deeply, viscerally wrong. Her phone buzzed again. "Unknown number. Don't let them bury me again." Sarah backed away from the window, heart pounding so loudly it drowned out the silence. The number wasn't registered, and the messages couldn't be traced when she tried. The police would dismiss it as a prank, or worse, assume she was slipping into the same paranoid delusions they believed had consumed Michael. And then came a knock at the door. 3 slow, heavy knocks. She wasn't expecting anyone. Certainly not at 2:28 a.m. She inched toward the front door, hands trembling. She peeked through the peephole. A man stood on the porch, soaking wet, barefoot, his head slightly tilted. And despite the impossible weight of it all, her heart whispered a single, chilling word. Michael. He looked older somehow, like time had passed differently for him. His skin was pale, his eyes darker than she remembered, shadowed with something hollow and unfathomable. But it was his face, his posture, his presence. She opened the door a crack, too stunned to speak. He leaned slightly toward her. "You weren't supposed to see me yet," he said softly. Her voice barely found her. "You're dead." He shook his head. "That's what they want you to think." She flung the door open, pulling him inside. Her mind screamed in protest, but her heart refused to let him go again. Inside, the air thickened with tension and confusion. Water pooled at his feet. The scent of wet earth and something metallic clung to him. "Michael, what the hell is going on?" she demanded. "They found your body. Your things. I buried you." "I wasn't in that car," he said. "I wasn't even near the bluff that night." "Then where were you?" He paused. His voice dropped to a whisper. "I was taken." She stared at him, trying to parse the madness. "By who?" He looked toward the window, as if afraid something might be listening. Not who, he said. What? Silence stretched between them, alive and pulsing. You wouldn't believe me, he added. You didn't before. No one ever does. You disappear, Michael. You kept rambling about the forest, about something behind the trees, and then you vanished. And now you're just back, after your funeral. He raised his hand slowly and placed it over hers. His skin was ice cold. I came back because it's not over. Because they're not done. Sarah felt the floor of her reality begin to crumble. They, she echoed. He nodded. The ones that mimic. The ones that pretend to be us after we're gone. The ones that wear our faces. The lights flickered. Michael looked at the ceiling, his eyes narrowing. They know I'm here, he whispered, and they'll try to finish what they started. Sarah awoke the next morning feeling like the air had thickened around her. The silence in the house was almost oppressive, and her dreams had been fragmented, disturbing. Whispers in the dark, a knock that never stopped, a shadow watching from the foot of her bed. As she moved through the house, every creak of the floorboards seemed magnified. The framed family portraits on the walls stared back at her, as if questioning her presence. She stopped in front of one. The image of her brother Caleb, and their parents, taken just months before his death. Something about the photo felt wrong. Caleb's eyes seemed almost different than she remembered. Too dark, too knowing. Later that afternoon, Sarah found herself in the hallway outside Caleb's room. The door was still slightly ajar. She hadn't dared to step in since last night. Taking a breath, she pushed it open fully and stepped inside. Everything was as he had left it. His books, his guitar, even the little clay wolf he had sculpted as a child sat on his shelf. But the room felt alive in a way it shouldn't have. She walked to the desk and saw something strange, his notebook. She opened it. The pages were filled with frantic handwriting, repetitive phrases. He's not me. The voice said I had to go. The door was open. I didn't want to walk through it, but it pulled me. If I return, it won't be me. Fire. Cold fire. No face. Sarah's hands trembled as she flipped through more pages. Drawings, charcoal sketches of eyes, doorways, skeletal figures cloaked in darkness. A crude sketch of a forest, a cave, and a humanoid figure without a face. Suddenly, a floorboard creaked behind her. She spun around, but the hallway was empty. That night, as she tried to sleep, the whisper returned. But this time it was clearer. He opened the wrong door. Sarah sat upright. Her heart pounded against her ribcage like a war drum. Her phone buzzed beside her. It was a voicemail. No number. She pressed play. It was static. Then, don't trust him, Sarah. Don't. The voice was unmistakable. It was Caleb. The real Caleb. The next morning, Sarah drove to the edge of town, toward the cemetery where Caleb had been buried. Her fingers clenched the steering wheel until her knuckles went white. She hadn't returned to his grave since the funeral. She didn't want to. It made everything too real. But now reality was already unraveling. The cemetery sat quiet under a gray sky. The wind stirred the dry leaves, and the old rusted gate gave a low groan as she pushed it open. Sarah walked among the rows of headstones, her breath sharp and shallow. When she finally reached Caleb's grave, a chill ran down her spine. His headstone stood exactly as she remembered. Simple, with his name, date of birth, and the words forever missed. But something was wrong. The soil looked disturbed. Fresh. There were no flowers, no grass growing, just loose dirt, slightly sunken, as if something had been removed. Sarah dropped to her knees and pressed her palm to the earth. It was cold, too cold. She turned abruptly as she heard a rustle behind her. A man stood about 30 feet away, partially hidden by an old oak tree. He wore a long brown coat and a black beanie. His eyes were fixed on her, unmoving. "Who are you?" she called out. He didn't answer. He just watched her. She stood quickly, heart racing. "Do you know something about my brother?" He slowly raised a hand and pointed to the grave. Sarah looked back. Now the headstone was gone. She gasped and spun around, but the man was gone too. There were no footsteps, no sound of movement, nothing. She staggered back to her car, barely able to breathe. When she got home, she stormed into Caleb's room and grabbed the notebook again. She flipped to the last page, which had been blank the night before. Now, something was written there, in jagged black ink. "Don't dig what should stay buried." Below it, a crude drawing, a coffin, open, something crawling out of it. Her phone buzzed again. This time a text message. From unknown. Message. You looked in the wrong place. He's watching you now. Sarah stared at the screen, her reflection faint in the black background. Behind her, in the corner of the room, a shadow moved. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She had locked every door, drawn every curtain, and turned on every light in the house. But it didn't matter. The fear wasn't outside. It was inside. Not just inside the house, inside her. She kept hearing things. Soft creaks in the hallway. The distant sound of dripping water, even though all the faucets were off. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the living room had grown louder, sharper, like a countdown. At 3:07 a.m., Sarah sat up in bed, suddenly alert. Something was whispering. She couldn't understand the words, but the tone was unmistakable, urgent, pleading, wrong. She followed the sound into the hallway, barefoot and trembling. The air was colder here, almost bitter. She pressed her ear to the wall. The whispering got louder. It wasn't in her head. It was inside the walls. She backed away slowly, but something caught her eye. There were markings along the baseboard. Scratches, like fingernails clawing to escape. She crouched, inspecting them more closely. The gouges weren't old. The paint was still peeling at the edges. Suddenly, her bedroom light flickered and went out. The hallway fell into shadow. From deep inside the wall, the whispering changed. It was no longer soft or pleading. It turned into something primal, hungry. A low growl bled through the plaster. Panicking, Sarah bolted down the stairs and nearly slipped as she reached the kitchen. She grabbed her phone from the counter and dialed the only number she trusted, Dr. Evelyn Roth, the trauma specialist she'd seen after Caleb's death. Voicemail. She hung up and turned to leave, but froze. All the cabinets in the kitchen were open. Every single one. She hadn't opened them. She knew she hadn't. She would have noticed. On the kitchen table, a note, folded in half. Shaking, she picked it up and opened it slowly. Inside, in red ink, they buried the body, not the soul. The front door suddenly creaked open on its own. Sarah stared into the darkness outside, and then she heard again his voice. Caleb's voice, calling her name, whispering it from the woods. The next morning, the world outside seemed unnaturally bright. The sun filtered through the windows with an intensity that felt almost offensive, as if it were trying too hard to erase the memory of the night before. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, staring at the folded note she had found just hours ago. They buried the body, not the soul. The words danced in her mind like a riddle she was never meant to solve. She hadn't slept. Her body ached with exhaustion, but her mind was too alert, too wired. Every creak in the old house jolted her nerves. She had locked every door, double-checked every window, but nothing could keep out the whispers. Dr. Evelyn Roth arrived just after noon, her presence bringing a fragile calm with it. Sarah opened the door without a word, her face pale and drawn. Evelyn stepped inside, her eyes immediately scanning the space, alert to every detail. "I got your message," she said quietly. "You said it's getting worse." Sarah nodded and handed her the note. Evelyn read it once, her brow furrowing deeply. "Where did this come from?" "I found it on the kitchen table after the whispers. After I heard Caleb." Evelyn looked up sharply. "You heard him?" Sarah's voice cracked. "He said my name. I swear it was his voice, Evelyn." Evelyn took a deep breath, her face hardening. "There's something I need to show you. Something I didn't tell you before." They walked in silence down the hallway toward the basement door. Sarah hesitated, her hand on the knob. She hadn't been down there since the day she returned. Something about it had always felt wrong. Evelyn took a small flashlight from her bag and clicked it on. "Your grandparents kept something hidden down here," she said. "Something they didn't want anyone to find." The door groaned open. A wave of cold air rushed out, heavy and damp. The steps creaked under their weight as they descended, the air growing thicker with each step. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing cobwebs, forgotten boxes, and thick dust. In the far corner of the basement, behind an old cabinet, Evelyn uncovered a narrow crawl space sealed with aged wooden boards nailed crudely into the frame. She crouched down and pried them loose with a crowbar. "What is this?" Sarah whispered, heart hammering. Evelyn didn't answer. She reached into the crawl space and pulled out a weathered metal box. Inside were old photographs, a bundle of letters, and a leather-bound journal. She handed the journal to Sarah. Sarah opened it carefully, the pages yellowed and brittle. It belonged to her grandfather. The entries began decades ago, mundane accounts of daily life. But as she flipped through, the tone shifted. The boy sees him. No matter how many times we hide the mirror, he keeps drawing the face. Not Caleb, the other one. Woke up to the walls bleeding again. Mary says we have to seal the basement. Bury the doll, but it still returns. Always back in the boy's room. The final entry was dated 3 days before her grandparents died. It read simply, "The bargain is breaking." Sarah felt her blood run cold. She looked at Evelyn, who was already sifting through the photographs. "They try to protect him," Evelyn said. "To protect you." But it wasn't enough. Suddenly, the flashlight flickered, then died. Darkness swallowed them. Sarah's breath hitched. From the crawl space, something shifted. A rustle, a scrape, a sound like nails dragging across stone. Then a whisper, right beside her ear. "Found you." She screamed and stumbled back, knocking over the cabinet. Evelyn grabbed her arm, dragging her toward the stairs, heart pounding. They scrambled up the steps, slammed the door shut, and bolted it. For a long moment, neither spoke. Sarah clutched the journal to her chest. The whisper still echoed in her ears. It wasn't her imagination. Something was in that basement, something that remembered her. The room felt colder than before, though no window was open and no wind stirred. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the untouched cup of coffee before him. The steam had long since vanished, but he hadn't noticed. His eyes were heavy, not from sleep deprivation, but from the weight of disbelief. Sarah was upstairs, alive, breathing, moving, but something in her was fundamentally off. Her voice had a delayed echo when she spoke. Her eyes sometimes didn't blink when they should. And the worst part, she never once asked about their parents. Not even once. He rose slowly and walked toward the staircase. Each step creaked under his weight, the sound amplified in the dead silence of the house. Halfway up, he paused. He could hear her humming, a soft, childlike tune. But not just any tune. It was the lullaby their mother used to sing. The same one Sarah had sung at their mother's funeral. The memory slammed into him like a wave. That moment, Sarah in her black dress, barely 17, holding his hand and trembling as she whispered the melody at the grave. But now, upstairs, the voice singing, it didn't sound like the Sarah he remembered. It was slower, stretched, as if the melody had been pulled through centuries of sorrow. He reached her door and knocked lightly. No answer. He turned the knob and stepped inside. Sarah stood by the window, back to him. Her hands were clasped behind her back, rocking gently from side to side as she continued humming. "Sarah," Ethan's voice cracked. She stopped rocking but didn't turn around. "I need to talk to you," he said, stepping closer. "Something's not right. You're not right." Still no answer. As he took another step, she finally turned. Her face was serene, too serene, a manufactured calmness that sent chills through his bones. Her eyes fixed on his, but there was something vacant in them. "You buried me," she said softly. Ethan froze. "You saw my face in that casket, didn't you?" Her voice didn't change pitch. It was emotionless. "I did. I swear to God, Sarah, I did." Her lips curled into a subtle smile. "Then who am I?" The question hung in the air, an impossible riddle with no safe answer. I don't know," he admitted, taking a step back. She took one forward. Behind her, the mirror on the wall flickered, as if a shadow passed over it. Ethan's eyes darted toward it, and what he saw nearly made his knees buckle. Her reflection didn't move. Sarah was stepping forward, but her reflection stood still, unmoving, its eyes locked with Ethan's in a stare that burned like frostbite. "Your reflection," he whispered, pointing. "It's not. You're not." She turned quickly and glanced at the mirror. For a second, her eyes widened with panic. But then the smile returned. "It's broken," she said, almost dismissively. "Reflections lie." She walked past him, brushing his shoulder. Her skin was cold, like metal. As she exited the room, Ethan turned back to the mirror. The reflection remained for one last breath, then smiled at him and vanished. The mirror hadn't stopped haunting Ethan. Every time he blinked, he saw that smile, that twisted mockery of Sarah's face etched into his vision. He tried smashing the glass after she left the room, but it didn't shatter. It just rippled like water-resisting force. That's when he knew he was in deeper than logic could reach. He couldn't go to the police. My dead sister came back, and her reflection is alive. They'd lock him up. Instead, he needed answers. Real ones. Tangible ones. He waited until Sarah left the house again. She had been taking long walks into the woods each day, always disappearing around dusk and returning after nightfall, dirt on her boots and an empty look in her eyes. She never explained where she went, and Ethan never had the courage to ask. As soon as she vanished into the trees, he rushed to the attic. That was where their father kept the old family records. Boxes of documents, faded photo albums, and letters no one ever read. Dust blanketed everything. The floor groaned under his weight as he pulled out one box after another, coughing as particles danced in the afternoon light. It wasn't until he opened a box marked Sarah that he found something that made his blood freeze. A second death certificate. His hands trembled as he held it up to the light. The document was yellowed with age, the ink smeared, but it was unmistakable. Sarah Elaine Hartley, born March 3, 1992, died October 11, 2008. But that date was a full year before the car accident. This certificate was signed and stamped by a coroner named Dr. Malcolm Firth, someone Ethan had never heard of. And attached to the back, pinned with a rusted paperclip, was a photograph. A photo of Sarah, pale and lifeless, lying on a table in what looked like a hospital morgue. He dropped the file and stumbled backward, knocking over a lamp in the process. As it hit the ground, the floorboard beneath his foot gave a sudden crack. Curious, he knelt and pulled at it. It came loose. Beneath was a narrow cavity, and inside, a leather-bound journal. Ethan opened it slowly. The first page read, in sharp, angry handwriting, "She is not your sister. She wears her skin. Do not let her feed." His breath caught in his throat. He flipped to the next page and saw symbols, hand-drawn sigils, and what looked like summoning diagrams. Scattered between them were panicked notes. "She walks at night, even when she's asleep. Reflections warn, but not always. The real Sarah died in the well behind the orchard. She came back when a mirror cracked in room 6. Room 6? There was no room 6 in this house. He stood up, heart pounding, and tried to remember the layout. Bedroom, kitchen, attic, basement, guest room. Then it hit him. The guest room used to be their grandfather's study. Before he passed, he called it room 6. No one ever questioned why. Ethan bolted down the stairs, journal in hand, and rushed to the guest room. The door creaked open with a soft moan. Dust covered the old desk, and the window was half covered by ivy growing from the outside. But the mirror was still there. The same mirror from the attic. How did it end up here? He approached it, heart racing, and held up the journal. The page with the sigil shimmered faintly as he drew closer to the glass. Then, suddenly, his own reflection moved its lips. "You're too late," it whispered. And behind him, the door slammed shut. The morning sun barely pierced through the heavy mist that had crept over the town like a suffocating veil. As Sarah sat by the kitchen table, a sense of unease lingered like stale air. Her thoughts were tangled with questions about her parents' reactions and the unnerving events of the previous night. Determined to uncover the truth about her past and her apparent death, Sarah ventured into the attic, a place sealed shut since her childhood. Dust clung to every beam, and the air was thick with mildew and forgotten memories. She pulled the attic ladder down, the creak of the old wood echoing like a scream in the silence. Climbing into the attic felt like ascending into another world, one suspended in time. Boxes lined the walls, all meticulously labeled, except for one. It was shoved into the farthest corner, untouched by years of cleaning. The moment her fingers brushed against it, a cold shiver ran down her spine. Inside the box were old photographs, newspaper clippings, and a collection of letters wrapped in faded ribbon. One headline stood out: "Local girl presumed dead in river accident. Body never recovered." Her name was printed in bold beneath it. Heart pounding, Sarah read the letters. They were from her mother, addressed to someone named Dr. Alden. The words were frantic, emotional, pleas for help, confessions of fear, mentions of the mirror, the reflection that wouldn't fade, and the voices that spoke only to Sarah sent chills through her veins. A sudden gust of wind slammed the attic window shut behind her. Sarah spun around, and for a moment, she wasn't alone. A figure stood in the shadows, a mirror image of herself, smiling faintly, eyes darker than midnight. The attic lights flickered. When they steadied, the figure was gone. Breathless, Sarah clutched the letters and raced downstairs. The answers were coming together, fragmented, buried, and terrifying. Her family had hidden something from her, something about who she really was, and what had really died in that river. But the attic had given her more than memories. It had awakened something. The moon hung low in the sky, a pale sliver barely illuminating the land below. Sarah sat in her room, staring out the window, her mind a tempest of confusion and fear. The image of the figure in the attic lingered in her mind. Each time she closed her eyes, it felt as though it was creeping closer. But tonight, there was something else, something that tugged at her chest, urging her to leave the house. She had to go. The need was so strong, she could no longer ignore it. It was as if some invisible force had taken root in her soul, compelling her to follow the call of the river, the very river where she had drowned years ago. She slipped out of the house unnoticed, her feet crunching on the gravel path as she made her way toward the familiar woods that led to the water. The trees loomed above her, their twisted limbs seeming to reach out, like dark hands trying to pull her deeper into the shadows. The wind whistled softly, but it felt cold, wrong, as though the air itself was warning her. The closer she got to the riverbank, the more the air thickened, pressing against her chest with each breath she took. Her heart hammered in her chest, not from fear, but from something else, a deep, ancient instinct, something primal that stirred within her, whispering that she was being watched. When she reached the river, the sight before her sent a chill through her veins. The water was unnaturally still, its surface like glass, reflecting the trees and the sky above with a perfect, eerie calm. But Sarah knew better. There was something wrong with the stillness. It wasn't natural. As she stepped closer to the water's edge, her reflection met her gaze, but it was wrong. The reflection didn't match her movements. She blinked, and her reflection blinked a moment later. She took a step forward, and the reflection followed, but it didn't feel like her anymore. There was something in those eyes, dark and empty, that made her stomach churn. Her breath caught in her throat. The reflection was smiling. Not just any smile, but a twisted, knowing grin that spread slowly across the face of the figure staring back at her. Her reflection moved, stepping out of the water, its gaze fixed on her, and for a split second, Sarah could see the woman's expression change, morphing into something darker, more sinister. But that wasn't the worst part. From beneath the water, a figure slowly began to emerge. At first, it was only a silhouette, pale and indistinct, but as it rose, Sarah could make out more details. The figure was a man, but his skin was deathly pale, almost translucent. His face was gaunt, with hollowed cheeks and sunken eyes that looked like deep, endless voids. His lips barely parted, revealing teeth that were far too sharp to belong to a living human. And then, slowly, impossibly, his eyes locked with hers. His gaze wasn't merely a stare. It was as if he could feel her, see right into her soul, unraveling the very essence of who she was. The air grew colder as he surfaced fully, his body impossibly thin, his hair long and dark, floating around him like seaweed caught in a current that didn't exist. His hand reached out from the water, fingers trembling as they hovered above the surface, beckoning. She staggered backward, her heart pounding in her chest, but the ground beneath her feet seemed to shift, as if the earth itself had become unstable. She couldn't move fast enough. Panic gripped her. She had to get away from this thing that wasn't human, that shouldn't exist in the real world. The reflection, the man, everything was wrong. She turned to run, but her feet felt like they were stuck in mud, dragging against the ground as if something invisible had a hold of her. Her legs felt like lead as she stumbled away from the river's edge, the man's voice calling out to her from the depths. "You came back." The voice was low, almost guttural, as though it came from the very bowels of the earth. And when it spoke, the world seemed to tilt, the trees shaking in response. the river's surface rippling violently, as if some ancient force had been unleashed. "No," Sarah whispered, but her voice was lost in the wind, swallowed by the stillness of the night. She could hear the man's laughter, deep and cruel, echoing from beneath the water, reverberating in her bones. "I didn't come back," she tried to say, but her words fell hollow. She didn't understand what was happening, why she was here, or what the man wanted from her. With all the strength she could muster, Sarah pulled herself away from the riverbank, stumbling through the forest. Her feet seemed to be dragging her, unwilling to obey her mind's command to run, to escape. The trees closed in around her, their branches twisting and reaching out as if trying to trap her. She could hear the water lapping against the shore, the sound of footsteps, hers or his. She couldn't tell anymore. She only knew one thing. She was not alone. Not anymore. Finally, she burst through the trees and back into the clearing, her lungs heaving for air. The house was ahead, but it felt farther than it ever had before. She felt changed. The woods, the river, they weren't just places anymore. They were something else, something that had been waiting for her, something that was now part of her. She glanced back one last time toward the river, and for the briefest of moments, she swore she saw a face in the water, his face, grinning at her. But before she could react, the image vanished. The night was silent once more, but the unease in her chest remained, gnawing at her, whispering that it had only just begun. When Sarah opened her eyes again, everything felt different. Her head throbbed, and her vision was clouded, but the sensation of wetness all around her was undeniable. It took her a moment to realize where she was. She was lying in the mud, her body covered in a cold, slick film. The air smelled of decay, of earth, of the river she had seen in her nightmares. The creature was gone. She tried to sit up, but her limbs were stiff, her muscles aching as if she had been pulled through the earth itself. Slowly, she managed to lift her head, her eyes scanning the darkness that surrounded her. The basement had vanished, replaced by an expanse of shadows that stretched on into eternity. The walls, the cold floor, everything had disappeared, leaving her in a vast, infinite space that felt more like a pit than a room. A low, rumbling sound reached her ears, vibrating through the ground beneath her. It was distant, but growing closer. The sound of water, the river, and with it, the unmistakable feeling of something pulling her. The ground beneath her trembled slightly, and she could feel the vibrations crawl up her spine. The air felt thick with anticipation, as if the very atmosphere was alive. Sarah's breath quickened, her heart pounding against her ribs as a shadow passed overhead. It wasn't a shadow from the walls, but something far more menacing, something that had been waiting for her, something older than the house and the land, something from the very depths of the earth. Her eyes darted around, but she couldn't see it. She didn't need to. She felt it, the pressure building around her, the air closing in, forcing her closer to the source of the rumbling sound, the river. Sarah's legs wobbled as she slowly stood up, feeling an instinctual pull toward the sound, toward the dark water that seemed to call her name. It wasn't just the river that was pulling her. It was something more, something tied to the house, to the darkness beneath it, to her. She stumbled forward, her feet sinking into the soft, wet earth. Each step felt heavy, as if she were walking through thick mud. But no matter how hard she tried to stop, she couldn't. The pull was too strong. The river, its deep, black surface gleaming with an unnatural shine, was ahead. Sarah's heart raced as she approached, her body trembling with fear and anticipation. The closer she got, the more she could hear the whispers, low murmurs, like the rustling of leaves in the wind, but with a darker tone. The voices were familiar now. "Sarah, Sarah," they echoed from all sides. She reached the edge of the river and looked down at the water. It was cold, its surface moving slowly, eerily calm. But beneath that calm, Sarah could feel the presence of something waiting. Without warning, the water rippled, and a hand shot out from the river, grasping at her. She screamed, but it was too late. The hand was cold, wet, with an inhuman strength. It gripped her wrist and pulled her into the river's depths. The world around her spun as she was dragged beneath the surface, her breath stolen by the icy water. She struggled, kicking and thrashing, but the current was too strong. The shadows beneath the water rose like creatures, hands reaching for her, pulling her deeper into the river's blackened heart. She tried to scream, but the water filled her lungs. The river was suffocating her, drowning her in darkness. But just before she lost consciousness, she saw it. The reflection of the creature, the same twisted, deformed figure she had seen in the basement, its hollow eyes staring back at her from the water. "You belong to us, Sarah." The words echoed in her mind as everything around her went black. Sarah's mind drifted in and out of consciousness, her body suspended in an eerie limbo between life and death. She was no longer in the river, but the feeling of water clung to her skin, as if the very essence of the river had entered her, infected her. Her lungs burned with each breath she took, but they no longer felt like her own. They were shallow, strained, as though her body had been taken over. The air around her was damp, thick with the scent of earth and decay. Her eyes fluttered open, but what she saw wasn't the familiar darkness of the forest or the inside of the house. She was in a cavernous space, the walls made of ancient stone, smooth and cold. The ground beneath her was hard and unyielding, but the sound of dripping water echoed through the space, creating a constant, rhythmic noise that rattled her nerves. For a moment, Sarah didn't move. She wasn't sure she could. Every part of her body felt wrong, as if something had changed within her. The fear she had felt before now felt like a distant memory, replaced by an overwhelming sense of dread that suffocated her. A low growl filled the air, making her blood run cold. It wasn't human. It wasn't even animal. It was something more, something ancient and primal. She tried to sit up, but the moment she did, the world around her shifted. The cavern seemed to pulse, the stone walls twisting, bending like they were alive, conforming to an unseen force. The sound of the dripping water grew louder, almost deafening now, as if it were rushing toward her, closing in from all sides. Suddenly, she heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoing off the walls. Sarah froze. She didn't know if she was ready to face whatever was coming, but she had no choice. She had to know what had happened to her, what had pulled her into this place. The footsteps grew louder, and then, out of the shadows, a figure emerged. It was tall, towering over her, its face hidden beneath a dark hood. Its shape was blurry, a silhouette, but the air around it felt charged, as though the very atmosphere crackled with dark energy. The figure didn't speak at first. It just stood there, watching her, studying her. "You've awakened." A voice finally rumbled from the figure's depths. The voice was deep, gravelly, like it was coming from somewhere far beyond the cavern itself. "You have finally crossed over." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Crossed over? Was she dead? Was this the afterlife? But no, this wasn't right. She wasn't ready to accept that. She had to find a way out. "What is this place?" she managed to rasp, her voice hoarse from the water she had swallowed earlier. "What's happening to me?" The figure stepped closer, its presence oppressive. "You are in the heart of the curse, Sarah. The place where all of this began. The river, the house, the darkness. It is all connected. And now you are part of it." She recoiled, shaking her head in disbelief. "No, I didn't choose this. I didn't ask for any of it." The figure tilted its head slightly, almost in amusement. "You may not have chosen it, but you cannot escape it. You are the key, Sarah. The house has been waiting for you." Suddenly, Sarah felt something. A strange pressure deep inside her chest. A connection she hadn't felt before. It was as if the house, the darkness, had planted something inside her, something that was waking up, something that didn't belong to her. The figure continued, its voice now taking on an even more sinister tone. "You've been marked. The curse will never release you, but there is a way to end it, if you're willing to pay the price." Her heart raced. "What do you mean? What price?" The figure's eyes glinted from under the hood, cold and ancient. "The river knows. It holds the answers you seek, but the cost is more than you can imagine." Sarah's mind spun. She had to know. She had to find a way to break the cycle, to escape this nightmare. "But what cost? I'll do whatever it takes," she whispered, her voice trembling with uncertainty. "Tell me what I need to do." The figure stepped closer, the shadows growing darker around it. "You must face what you fear the most. Only then can the curse be broken. But be warned, Sarah, the truth you seek will come at a price. And once it's revealed, there will be no turning back. The cavern seemed to shift once more, the walls closing in around her, as the figure's voice faded into the distance. Sarah was left alone in the dark, the weight of its words pressing down on her. She had no choice. She had come this far. The journey ahead would be treacherous, but she couldn't stop now. She had to face whatever was coming. The price was high, but the cost of inaction could be even worse. The car's tires crunched over the gravel as Sarah drove down the long-forgotten road to Ash Hollow. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the trees that lined the path like silent sentinels. She hadn't seen this road in over a decade, not since the day of Michael's funeral. But now it pulled her in with a sense of urgency, a compulsion as if someone, was waiting. Her grip tightened on the steering wheel as the car passed the hollow's entrance. The archway was still there, though rusted and cracked, barely holding the ancient wooden sign that read Ash Hollow Cemetery. The wind seemed to whisper as she crossed the threshold. Every instinct told her to turn back, but she couldn't. Not yet. She parked the car near the chapel ruins. The air was unnaturally still. Birds had stopped singing, and not a single insect buzzed. She stepped out, the soft crunch of her boots echoing too loud in the quiet. Flashlight in hand, Sarah moved toward the place she remembered, Michael's grave. The rows of headstones looked untouched by time, yet wrong somehow, like they'd shifted ever so slightly when no one was looking. She found it. Michael Donovan, beloved son and brother, 1996 to 2021. Tears welled in her eyes. She remembered that day. The empty coffin, the priest's hollow words, the way her mother broke down and her father stood in silence, refusing to speak another word to anyone since. But now she knew Michael didn't die that day. Or maybe he did, and something else had come back. Behind her, twigs snapped. She spun around. Nothing. She whispered, "Michael." The wind picked up. The air grew colder. From behind a large oak, a shadow emerged. Slowly, deliberately. She held her breath as the figure stepped into the fading light. It was him, or something that wore his face. Michael stood in front of her, eyes hollow and flickering with something ancient and wrong. His skin had the pallor of someone long buried, and his mouth twisted in a half-smile. Almost loving, almost mocking. "I knew you'd come back," he said, voice raspy and echoing. What are you?" she asked. He tilted his head. "I'm what you made me. What they buried. But I never left." "Not really." Sarah took a step back. "You're not my brother." "I was," he whispered, "until the hollow claimed me." Suddenly, he moved, too fast. He was inches from her, his breath cold and foul. "Do you want to know what it feels like to be buried alive? To hear your name spoken in mourning while you scream beneath the soil?" She trembled, unable to speak. "But it's not too late," he whispered. "You can come with me. We can go back to where it all ended." She turned and ran. Behind her, the thing that looked like Michael screamed, a sound so inhuman, it shattered the silence and drove birds into the air in frantic panic. Sarah didn't look back. Sarah's lungs burned as she sprinted through the underbrush, branches whipping against her skin. The air around her thickened with each step, as though the forest itself tried to hold her back. The scream still echoed in her ears, a sound that didn't belong to the living or the dead. Somewhere behind her, the thing wearing Michael's face pursued in silence. She burst through the trees into a clearing, one she didn't recognize. At its center stood a decaying mausoleum, half swallowed by vines and time. A heavy iron door, marked with symbols she'd only seen in the back pages of her grandmother's Bible, stood ajar. Despite her terror, something drew her toward it. The name carved above the entrance stopped her cold. Donovan Family Crypt. She didn't remember this being here. No one ever mentioned a crypt. It wasn't on any map. And yet, there it was. A low growl echoed from the forest. Michael, or whatever wore his skin, was close. She slipped inside. The air turned bitterly cold. The beam of her flashlight caught motes of dust swirling like ash. The stairs descended in a tight spiral, slick with moss and cracked stone. She hesitated, but the growl grew louder. With no choice left, Sarah descended. The air grew heavier with each step. At the bottom, she emerged into a large chamber lined with tombs. On the far wall, an altar stood, ringed with burnt candles, animal bones, and something darker, human remains. And in the center of the room, a stone slab. A figure lay atop it, her breath caught. It was Michael, but this one didn't move. He looked younger, peaceful, preserved as if in sleep. "What the hell?" she whispered. "You shouldn't be here," said a voice behind her. She turned. The false Michael stood at the entrance, blocking the stairs. His face had begun to crack, revealing glimpses of something monstrous beneath. "I came for answers," she said, backing toward the altar. He chuckled. "No, you came because I called you. Because I need you." She raised the flashlight like a weapon. "You're not my brother." "No," he said, "but I was born from him. From his pain. From your family secrets." He stepped closer. "They made me when they buried the truth with him." She glanced at the altar again. Something shimmered near Michael's preserved body. A pendant, old and tarnished, glowing faintly. She snatched it. At once, the false Michael howled and reeled back, smoke rising from his skin. "What did you do?" he growled, his voice no longer human. The pendant pulsed in her hand, growing hot. Visions filled her mind. Michael as a child, the night of the accident, the ritual her parents performed to seal something away beneath the hollow, using Michael's soul. They hadn't buried a body. They had buried a prison, and now it was breaking. The false Michael lunged. Sarah raised the pendant and screamed. Light exploded from it, engulfing the crypt. The walls trembled. Dust rained from the ceiling. A voice, not hers, spoke through her mouth, ancient and commanding. "Return to the pit for which you crawled." The entity shrieked, clawing at the air as it was pulled backward by unseen force, unraveling like smoke and wind. With a final scream, it vanished. Silence. The pendant cooled. Sarah collapsed to her knees, gasping. When she looked again, the preserved body of Michael was gone. Only dust remained, and far above, the door of the crypt creaked shut. Sarah stood motionless at the entrance of the old crypt, the ancient wooden door yawning open like a hungry mouth. Her breath curled in the cold air, heart pounding with a rhythm that matched the trembling earth beneath her. The whispers of the forest had led her here, and now, she knew, whatever had stolen her brother's soul, whatever had mimicked Ethan's presence, waited below. The crypt's stone steps spiraled downward, slick with moss and damp from decades of neglect. With every step, Sarah felt the air grow heavier, denser, laced with the scent of decay and iron. Her flashlight flickered as if protesting the journey, casting long, skeletal shadows along the walls. She reached the bottom. What she saw wasn't a tomb. It was a chamber, massive, carved into the very bedrock. Its center held an altar of bones twisted into unnatural shapes, and around it, hooded figures stood in silence, chanting in a language that clawed at the edges of sanity. She recognized the voice leading them. Ethan, or whatever had taken Ethan's form. He stood at the far end of the altar, face half shadowed by firelight. But it wasn't the Ethan from her childhood. His eyes shimmered with inhuman hunger, skin pale and stretched thin, like something wearing her brother's body like a costume. "Sarah," he said, smiling with teeth too sharp. "You've come just in time." She stepped forward, rage and fear boiling in her chest. "You're not my brother." "I was," the creature said, "and I could be again, if you let me finish what was started." The hooded figures turned in unison to face her. Their hoods fell back. Faces, all familiar, every one of them. People from the village. People who had vanished. The librarian, the gas station attendant, the mayor, all with dead eyes and slack, puppet-like mouths. "Sacrifice," Ethan whispered, stepping down from the altar. "One more life, and the veil will open. I can come back. We all can." Sarah shook her head, tears streaming. "This isn't resurrection. This is possession. You buried me," Ethan said softly. "But I never left. I just changed." He extended a hand. "Choose. Let me in, or join them." For a moment, Sarah's knees buckled. She remembered the warmth of his laughter. The nights they spent under blankets, scared of the dark. The way he had always protected her. But what stood before her wasn't Ethan. It was a predator wearing his voice. She gripped the locket around her neck, a photo of them as kids inside, and took a step back. "No." Ethan's smile vanished. "You've made your choice," he said. The chamber began to tremble. The walls bled shadows. From the altar, tendrils of black smoke erupted, reaching for her like claws. But Sarah was ready. From her backpack, she pulled the old journal, the one hidden behind the false wall of Ethan's room. Inside it, ancient rites, protective seals, and one page in particular, the binding sigil. A last-ditch weapon scrawled in blood. She slammed it to the ground and screamed the incantation. The chamber exploded with light. The shadows screamed. The figures collapsed like marionettes with their strings cut. Ethan, no, the thing inside him, howled, its skin peeling, bones snapping, as it was dragged back into the rift opening beneath the altar. Sarah didn't stop chanting until the rift sealed shut, the silence returning with suffocating finality. She stood alone. The altar cracked. The fire died. The crypt was still. And for the first time since Ethan returned, she felt peace. But she also knew something had looked at her from the other side of the veil, and it remembered her name. Rain lashed the windshield as the van carved its way through the winding back roads that led deep into the valley, a place Sarah remembered only in fragments. The route itself felt like a path etched from nightmares, one that had been forgotten by time and sealed by memory. Ethan sat beside her in silence, his knuckles pale as he gripped the steering wheel. Behind them, the remaining pages of the journal lay in a leather folder, bound by a trembling ribbon. What they had read the night before still echoed inside her. Names of children gone missing, medical records, names of successful merges, and strange diagrams of neurological patterns. Each page proved one thing. Sarah had been part of an experiment. Not an accident, not a victim, but the central subject. The van stopped before a rusted iron gate, its hinges weeping with rust. Beyond it stood a decrepit sanatorium, long abandoned by the world, but not by its ghosts. "This is where they kept you," Ethan said, his voice hollow. "No," Sarah corrected. "This is where they made me." The inside was choked with mold and dust, the air thick with the taste of decay. Old beds sat askew, leather restraints dangling. They passed walls scratched with numbers, countdowns, messages, or the desperate scratches of forgotten souls. In the far chamber, a power generator rumbled unexpectedly to life. "Wait," Ethan whispered. "They still use this place." The hum of fluorescent lights flickered, casting long, erratic shadows. Sarah followed the noise deeper into the bowels of the facility until she found a mirrored room, broken glass spidering across the floor. In the reflection, she didn't see just herself, but dozens of versions, half-formed images of the girl she used to be, her face distorted in each one. One was smiling, another crying, one screaming. Her chest tightened. Then something clicked. "This isn't about bringing me back," she said aloud. "It's about controlling who I become." Behind her, a door creaked. A man stood there. It wasn't the scientist from the visions. It was her father, or what appeared to be. "Sarah," he said, "you came home." "You're not my father," she said. "No, but I've worn him long enough to learn what makes you obedient." From the shadows, more figures emerged, identical versions of Ethan and of herself. Clones, echoes. She stumbled back as one of the Ethan copies stepped forward and hissed in a voice too deep to be human. She must not leave again. Ethan pulled her back just as the lights went out. Gunfire erupted. Screams. Mirrors shattered. When Sarah opened her eyes again, she was on the ground, her ears ringing. Ethan was dragging her by the arm through a collapsing hallway, flames licking the edges of the rotting walls. "We triggered something," he shouted. "Self-destruct." "No." They're erasing the evidence. A recording on the wall sparked to life, a doctor's voice filling the corridor. "Subject 33, as reintegration has failed. She is rejecting the merge. She must be terminated before instability spreads." The floor beneath them cracked, revealing a chasm of blackness. Without warning, Sarah jumped, dragging Ethan with her. They landed in darkness. Wet earth. Silence. Then, from the gloom, a single voice whispered, "Sarah." It was her mother, or someone wearing her skin. The night was impossibly still as Sarah stood in front of the old cellar door in the woods. The portal had opened again, without the rituals, without the chanting. It was simply there, breathing, pulsating, waiting. She gripped the rusted lantern, the same one Ethan had used the first time he crossed. Her fingers trembled. Behind her, Detective Marlowe, bloodied but conscious, leaned against a tree. He whispered her name, but she didn't turn back. Everything ends where it started, she murmured to herself. Sarah had pieced it all together. The markings on her childhood wall, the voices, the mysterious disappearances, and the cold truth. She hadn't escaped hell. She was its ambassador. The demon had not followed her back. It had entered with her, made home in her, used her memories and grief to fuel its presence in this world. Inside her, two versions of herself battled. One terrified, fragile, human, and the other cold, immortal, twisted by torment. She looked down at the journal Ethan had left behind. It had only one phrase written over and over on the final page. The only way to seal it is from the other side. Sarah stepped forward. The wind howled like a dying scream as she descended into the portal. The moment her foot passed the threshold, the entire forest groaned. Trees bent unnaturally. The earth cracked. The smell of sulfur burned her throat. The demon waited below. Its massive eyes reflected her every thought, her every fear. But this time she did not shrink. She spoke its true name. The beast shrieked. The ground split open further. Sarah raised the pendant, Ethan's, over her heart, then whispered, "You no longer belong here." "I do." With one final breath, she let the portal consume her. Above, the skies cleared. Silence returned. Detective Marlowe limped toward the cellar, only to find it had vanished. Nothing but roots and earth. Weeks later, in a quiet town, a child woke up screaming. She's still there. She's still watching. In the final frame of Ethan's journal, a new line had appeared, in ink no one remembered placing. "Hell doesn't trap you. It waits for you to come home."